All right, how's it going, guys? My name is Flores. Today we're going to be presenting on SECSMASH, kind of a framework about owning enterprises with tools already in place. So like I said, my name is Flores. I work for a company called Tvora in Southern California. I work as a penetration tester, red teamer, digital forensics as well. Former Marine, so did that. And additionally, on top of that, I like to do research of offensive tactics and tool development. Plus, I'm also a copy master. So.
Hey guys, my name's Kevin Dick. I'm really excited to be here with you guys. I'm also a red teamer at Tvora. I manage the threat practice for us, overseeing our penetration testing practice, and one of the main leads as well on those projects. Like Steve, really doing a lot of aspiring to be really prolific open source tool developer, working on red teaming tactics. Not so much as a coffee teamer as him. And yeah, he put HackerMan 9000, that wasn't me, so.
All right, so what we'll be talking about today. So we're going to talk about kind of the origins of the idea, where this kind of idea came from, what the attack scenario would look like from kind of start to finish from an attacker's perspective, the overview of what our tool actually looks like. We'll give you a live demo of it, attacking an actual enterprise security product. And then we'll talk about mitigations and then close it off with kind of closing remarks and questions if anyone has any. So origins of this idea. So over time, our company, we work with a lot of security vendors to deploy security products. We work closely with them. So we get to see a lot of these security products out there that are in the current market. You go to Black Hat, go to RSA, you see all these tools out there that are being used. So we see them all the time. And on the offensive side, during penetration tests, we see them in these environments all the time. So, over time, we started wondering, we see this constantly, and the architecture of these things are interesting, to say the least. We look, this thing could be used for evil potentially, because at the end of the day, it's got a pretty deep level of access. So one of our objectives for red teaming is, understand your environment, understand where things are, figure out where everything is, and accomplish your objective eventually over time. So we would leverage tools like this and attacks like this to accomplish our objective and get to areas and places that we want to be at. So we'll kind of give a little dummy infrastructure would look like for your organization. You have your security solution deployed out there. It's connected to all your agents. We got, you can running either, say, some sort of FIM or EDR, Splunk, SIM, what have you. And so this is kind of basically what it looks like. Now we'll look about what a C2 infrastructure looks like. You got your C2 server talking to all their affected endpoints. Ultimately, it's the same thing. These are pretty much legitimate C2 infrastructures that are already built for you. And so, why not leverage what's already existing to get where we need? So targeting our infrastructure, the key task for any red team or penetration test, actually more of red team, you want to set up a stealthy C2 infrastructure. Obviously get your command control of your targeted workstations, endpoints, servers, what have you. You want to get to your objective, you need to move around. So our idea is, why not take over what is already existing? There's already a C2 infrastructure, let's just use that. And our original proof of concept and research for this started off with Splunk. A lot of times you go on engagements, people got Splunk servers, and you'd be surprised how many times that they're left uncredentialed with default credentials. Instantly right there, without ever doing anything, you're just owning a massive environment in seconds, pretty much. And with, like I was talking about before, since we work with a lot of these vendors, we see a lot of them have the same kind of capabilities where they can talk to these endpoints as well. So that's kind of where we started off with it. So normally in these endpoints, they run with really high privileges, system and root level privileges. So all your post-exploitation techniques that you would normally do that need to have elevated privileges, you're there right off the bat as soon as you get access to these security tools. Ultimately, they act, like I said, as legit botnet C2 infrastructures with signed binaries, actions that allow attackers to do things, memory dumping, process dumping, stuff like that. There's stuff that as an attacker, you can leverage all the time. File uploading, file downloading. There's a lot of things that you can do with these tools. We take advantage of the architecture. So we're not really doing anything like exploiting any services. It's just kind of taking advantage of what a blue team has at their disposal. We're giving it to the red team now. So security products become a high-value target. Like, normally during red team engagements, you want to go after domain admin. Well, with this, you really don't need it right away. You can find your security product and get mass code execution in an environment without having to try to have domain privilege escalation to a domain admin level user. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we're using these tools for the complete opposite reason that they're even around. So we'll talk about the attack scenario. Normally during a red team engagement, you have your initial compromise. Get your foothold, you kind of do some post-exploitation, find out where you are, where you want to be. So target specific users. Go look at Active Directory, look at group names. You'll find a wealth of information. All the information is there. You just have to look for it. Find out, a lot of times organizations will go in there and you see, oh, they're part of a group called Splunk. They're part of a group called Tripwire. They're part of a group whatever, admins, something like that. That seems like a person that we want to go after. So we'll go after those users. And also, in addition to that, a lot of times we'll see these users are using their Active Directory credentials to manage these products. And sometimes even LDAP authentication, which allows us to just move even quicker into getting into some of these environments. So we gain access to our security tool, and we deploy our tool SECSMASH, which can target really any of these security tools that operate with this kind of level of access in an environment. Once you do that, you pretty much just have a massive C2 infrastructure that you can go and do whatever you want, and you're golden from that point on. So for the first part, like I mentioned, user hunting. Hunting for domain admin is great. Yeah, you're going to have a high level of privilege, but it's not exactly always necessary. We can hunt for the people that administrate or administrators for these security products. So we'll go after those. And additionally, also, a lot of these domain admin accounts, sometimes they're secured pretty well, so it's kind of a little more time to take to get to that level of access. LDAP authentication, like I said, sometimes you'll see it in a lot of these security products, and you dump creds from memory using Mimikatz on a box, and then now you can just go and log into the security product, and now you can get code execution everywhere. Many of these tools are implemented by contractors who don't always implement the best security as well. You'll go into an environment and they have disabled accounts or old accounts that hadn't had passwords changed in forever. Maybe possibly still use an LM hash, things that really you don't want to do, and they just leave the account in there because it's not managed very well. So we'll take advantage of that as well. And like I said, gaining access using weak shared credentials, contractors are kind of notorious for sharing their credentials sometimes in some of these tools. Default passwords, like I said, a lot of times you go into environments, tools like Splunk, no password, default password, instantly you're done right there. You can just own everything instantly. Launch exploits. I mean, you look at any of these security tools, most of them have had exploits in them. Splunk's had exploits, Tripwire, remote code execution against these tools. So, just because they're a security tool doesn't mean they're immune to software vulnerabilities. And you can just write your casual 0-day and get access that way as well.
So Steve gave a high-level overview of the tool, kind of the purpose, right? We're switching our user hunting to not only focus on AD, where there's been a ton of tools for searching for AD users, getting to domain admin, and then, of course, completing your mission. You usually have to go further than that to bypass network segmentation and get to other locations. This is really saying, we can actually user hunt for people for these enterprise security tools, or really any enterprise management tool that's spread across the enterprise, and you're able to get a much higher level access than you would from even a DC in many cases. So I want to go into more specifics here with a specific product, Tripwire. This is one of the products we've integrated into our tool that we can actually leverage as basically a C2 infrastructure if we have the credentials for it in the environment. So basically, we've followed the attack path that Steve has laid out, where we've got the credentials to Tripwire through user hunting or weak passwords, normal red team activities, right? But we're going after those Tripwire users in particular. And what can we do with this tool? This is just an example, but Tripwire is basically a tool for managing and tracking changes on endpoints. And it does it in a variety of different ways. There's real-time agents that will flash on a change. There's file changes that will trigger on. But what we're interested in how we leverage it actually is something called a command output capture rule. Basically what this does is it might run netstat ABO on your system at a certain time, run it again, 20 minutes later, see if there's a new listening port. Okay, that's an alert. Well, what this is doing basically is running an arbitrary command on that system as the system user in most cases. So you can kind of imagine what commands you might want to put in there that you could use to actually start taking advantage of this. So let's say we're on a red team. We did user hunting. We know Tripwire is using LDAP authentication, and it has, we've got credentials to someone who has a Tripwire group. So pretty good indication. We can probably log into Tripwire with that. We try, we're in. Okay, what next? The first thing to do is create an evil rule. So you probably don't want to name it, sex trip rule, or just name it something that would make it like blend in. This rule is going to be basically this, where it has the command that you're going to run. Now, you actually have to trigger the rule to operate, right? So you're going to go ahead and basically assign that to a node. And you can basically say, run this command output capture rule on this node by clicking check rule, and it's going to run whatever you had in that command as system on that host. Now, again, the real advantage of this, right, let's say even we have domain admin credentials, and those domain admin credentials are good for Tripwire. Well, maybe we can't get into the PCI zone from where we are. Now, what would you do traditionally in a red team, right? You're going to be pivoting, you're going to be opening tunnels, you're going to be trying to find the right host that has access to get to that zone. Well, the good thing for you is these tools, in order for them to work, have to have access to those zones. The other good thing is these tools are deployed to protect the most sensitive systems, so they probably have access to the most sensitive systems. So you get on them, you push the code to your node, and you get command execution on there. You could also, obviously, if you wanted to see a bunch of shells right in, just put it on the root node and watch everything get owned running your rule. But you probably don't want to do that unless it's in a lab environment. And again, ideally, the command output capture rule will run, and you'll get your agent. Lastly, for Tripwire, you probably want to delete your evil rule. Don't want to create a bunch of corrupt in your client's environments. Now, that's just one example, right? Now, the problem is there's a lot of these tools out there that have similar capability. But unless you've worked with them, how are you going to know how to go through this? Our goal is we want to make that easier for everyone, as accessible as it is for example, taking advantage of getting domain admin. Active Directory is basically the same thing, right? Where you basically now have command and centralized control over many systems in an organization. Well, a lot of these tools are very similar, but they don't have the same amount of tools and support available for everyone to use unless they have a lot of experience with them. So our goal here is to kind of unify all those options in a modular framework that we can basically use to handle more tools. And that's what we're releasing as SECSMASH. So really, again, this tool was intended to provide pen testers the ability to quickly discover and assess these systems and leverage them during their testing without having to be an expert Tripwire integrator or expert Carbon Black or Splunk integrator. The tool will basically let you kind of not have to worry about the details. And it's basically a modular framework so that the experts or the people that have experience with those tools can contribute their expertise into the framework so you can basically leverage that expertise on your pen test as well. We obviously have some expertise in Tripwire and some other products that we're releasing with the tool from the get-go, but there's a lot of products that we haven't had our hands on, and we'll kind of go into that later on with what we're kind of wanting to get out of community involvement here. So that's an idea of a specific example, high level how the tool works. Steve's going to go a little bit more into the details on the use of the tool.
So you get on your environment. First thing you obviously need to do is kind of do some situational awareness, find out where you are. You need to do your discovery. Find out if there, first of all, on any particular subnets that you can talk to, are any of these tools there? Can you, find a method of identifying them? So we have actually that built into it, where you can give it a subnet, single IP, what have you, and it will tell you if there's this whatever security product there's a module for exists in this network. So the modules are pretty much set up as you have a regex for how you want to find the security product, the port you want to target, and just some kind of basic information for discovery as well. So the discovery engine, what it does, loads these modules, pick your module, you'll see in the demo later on what this kind of looks like. So you pick your module, give it your information that you need to give it, and let it go. And if anything comes back, then you have, that you have potentially found a tool that you can exploit or take advantage of, rather. The regex, like I said, matches specific results depending on the module. And additionally, you don't have to use our discovery methods. You can use tools like Nmap, Eyewitness. If anyone is in here earlier saw Chris Trunser's talk, he's a developer of Eyewitness, which is a tool that pretty much takes screenshots for you based on an IP address for what's running on specific protocols. So if you want to find say, look at everything running a web server in an environment. You run an eyewitness, will give you the output back. You can look at, see anything running a screenshot. A lot of times for maybe an internal penetration test, you'll have the ability to just kind of go to those manually and see what's running. During a red team, when you're not on the internal environment physically, then you'll have to do your SOX proxy to kind of view what these are. This just makes it a lot easier by going through, taking a screenshot, sending it back to you so that you can see what's there. So once we have our discovery done, we know that there's a tool there. We have our creds. Say we exploited a user that has access to Tripwire, exploited that has access to Splunk, something like that. We'll do our enumeration. So what we're doing is we're going to be enumerating the actual service to see what nodes are connected, possibly get more information about the environment, what is where. So we'll call them, in this tool we call them controllers. Couldn't come up with a really great name to call a security product. It sounds kind of weird. So going forward, you'll hear the term controller, and that's really what we're talking about. Right now, our output comes back with the ID, hostname, the ID referring to the ID in the security product, the hostname of that particular host, and then the OS of what it is. And so you can also run some arbitrary things with that as well that we'll talk about later. So once you have your enumeration done, you can either target the entire everything connected to that particular security product or controller rather, and start just getting a massive amount of shells, or you can just target specific ones individually. I don't need to own everything to make my point. If I want to get into a sensitive network, PCI zone, what have you, I can target that particular IP address or that particular host, get a shell on there, or do whatever you need. Ultimately, also, you don't need to use another, say, popular RAT like something like Interpreter, Empire, Cobalt Strike, anything like that. You can just have command execution and command output straight through this as well. So you have the ability to kind of do whatever suits your needs for your particular engagement. And like I said, you can read your command output, so you don't really need to use something like Empire or anything like that. So I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Kevin to kind of show you what this looks like in practice.
All right, guys, it's demo time, so hopefully this works. We're going to show you basically how to use the tool against the Tripwire instance, show you what it looks like, and in this case, we're basically going to use it just to open a shell in our favorite RAT, Empire.
So one of the things you also notice as Kevin's going through this is that the look and feel of this is very similar to Empire. We love using Empire all the time, so I like the way it looks, and so I kind of just designed it to look like that.
All right. So we have our little network here. You can imagine that we are an attacker that's gotten into an environment, and we have a shell on an internal system. Or we're doing an internal pen test, and we're here for a laptop in kind of a regular network. Now that network has access to the Tripwire instance. Let's say this Tripwire instance isn't segmented, it's just on the regular network. But when you really can't see that, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. But that Tripwire instance, you're trying to get into the PCI zone, let's say to exfiltrate credit cards, and you can't reach it directly. Now in this network, it's kind of a contrived example, but we have that Tripwire system, that secure PCI zone system, and we're going to basically use SECSMASH to use the Tripwire system to get a shell on that PCI system. So we'll go ahead and start up SECSMASH. And like Steven mentioned, we have a discovery function built in. Now, I'd probably recommend, like he said, to probably use something like Nmap and eyewitness if you're going to be more advanced. Those are obviously a lot more customizable and purpose-built, but we do have a basic one in here that you can use. In this case, we know the subnet. You can have it scan the subnet, but we actually know which server it's on, so we're just going to hit it at an IP. 136. Run that.
It can sometimes take a while, so just to save time, we'll go ahead and just say we found one at this IP.
Yep, so there we got it. Yeah, Steve was saying if we do the subnet enumeration, it's not super fast. That's why it's probably better to use Nmap and eyewitness, but this is good for confirming as well. So I got my target, so I'm going to go ahead and start enumerating it. And again, the enumeration phase is basically to figure out, okay, I know this is a security product that I have access to. What hosts are on that I can actually get a shell on? So let's go ahead and see what our options are. Well, first we'll set our username, which is administrator. And set our password, which is super secure. Then we're going to set our target, which is going to be that host we just discovered. Again, this is going to be a host name or IP. And lastly, we need to set our module, so it knows which one it's going to be using to discover. So now we're all set. We can go ahead and run our discovery. We can enumerate the Tripwire instance and figure out what endpoints we have accessible to us. So we can see we have a bunch on here. Now, I know the one I'm targeting, the one I really care about, is this IP. Now, again, this is as simple as possible so our demo wouldn't break. In a real-world environment, you really be wanting to do it against an IP that'd be in a different segregated subnet, right? Imagine that's the case for now. In this case, they're on the same local subnet, so this probably wouldn't even be necessary. So I'm going to grab this IP, and I'm basically going to want to exploit it. So I can go ahead and go into the smash phase now, and I can see my options have carried over. I'm going to go ahead and set the endpoint, and then I'm going to get my payload ready. So got the endpoint here. Now, one thing to note, if you don't set the endpoint, it actually by default just hits every endpoint on there. We might want to change that, but it's kind of fun to do if you want like a load of shells coming through. So I'm going to start up Empire.
Yeah, and once you do that, you really can't stop it. So you're just going to have a massive amount of shells coming in.
Which is always fun.
The client might not always think so, but.
So I got my handy payload ready. And we're going to set payload, not in that window.
Show it again.
What's that?
Just do options.
Okay.
Options. Just options. So one thing that we did is that we didn't want to like make it kind of like look all ugly with like just a long payload. So we just kind of made the strings short, but the full payload's there. It just, you can't see it.
Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now. And it should basically reach out and pwn that endpoint through our credentials in Tripwire. So demo gods be with us. We should see an agent coming through. And there we are, initial agent. So I can interact. Now, one thing to note, Tripwire is kind of interesting because the HTTP request basically doesn't end until the agent exits. We need to do some tweaking to handle that a little better, but I'll go next into basically how our modular system works and how you can build these so you can understand how that's working. So we can see the info for the agent. We've got it. I'm going to go ahead and exit from that now. So that's killing it. And then we should see basically once that agent kills, the SECSMASH thing should exit out of that loop, and it's going to do another request to basically delete that rule automatically so it's not in their system anymore. Yep, and that will happen eventually, so it might not be worth watching for. But cool. So I'm going to go back to the slide deck here. So again, Tripwire is just one example. This thing wouldn't be that useful if it's a purpose-built tool for targeting Tripwire, right? Just use the GUI. The idea of this is not that you purpose target one thing, it's that we can have multiple things in here that we can leverage as a RAT. Again, this example, we basically opened an Empire stager for the sake of demonstration, but you can imagine you could actually just run single commands on here and use this as your RAT. One of the biggest challenges now, people are talking about application whitelisting. You're trying to get your payloads whitelisted. You're worried about your traffic. If you're using an existing product for your command and control communication, you don't have to worry about that. Not only are those signed binaries that are whitelisted by the domain, the traffic's going to look normal because it's already there and part of the regular systems. And lastly, there's a ton of network whitelisting through these devices to make them work. So you don't have to worry about conniving your way around the network in order to get what you want. You just go directly to it. So again, the usefulness of this is really the integration framework that we built. And as you saw in the tool, there's basically three flows. So there's authentication, enumeration, and smashing, which is basically the execution. We also have the discovery dictionary, but that's not a core part. That's more in the menu. And basically, there's a class here where you can implement each one of these functions. Now, most of the tools we encounter, and most things that are out there run on HTTP. So we built basically a subclass of integrator called HTTP integrator. And what this allows you to do is basically capture a request flow in your favorite proxy, like Burp or something, and really just extract variables from responses and replace them in your future requests. So you can have an array of request chains for each step, and each step of the way, let's say authentication, if it's multi-step, it will get one variable from its first request, use that in the next one until eventually it gets the auth token variable. There's a couple key variables that basically the product or framework knows to use, like sex auth token and host and command result. So as long as you make sure that you're extracting those, you're going to be able to get that in the product. And it's probably too small for you guys to see here, but basically the way it works is you can see we're basically putting the request in as a string, and then we're going ahead and we have different extraction methods. This one's a cookie extraction where we're basically just saying take the G session ID and put that in the sex auth token variable. We also can do arbitrary extractions using regular expression matching groups. So you basically can set up 3 or 4. Oh. Sorry about that, guys. I guess my mic turned off. So the is that better? Great. So the regular expressions are good for basically you can do arbitrary extractions from web pages. Things that use API are going to be a little easier because you use JSON. But if you're hitting, you can actually scrape pretty easily using these regular expressions. Additionally, you can also pass custom functions to these extractions. So let's say it's too complicated for me to use a regular expression, and the built-in extractions using like cookies or headers, they're not in there. You can just create an enumeration extraction that's going to take these 3 variables, the response, the host, and the existing variables, and do whatever you want with it. This is an example actually for another product where we're basically just pulling them out of JSON really easily. That might be something we build in the future where it's just, hey, list things in JSON we're going to pull out, but you can imagine you can use this to handle nested objects or XML, any arbitrary data. Regexes would work for those potentially, but it's going to be bigger pain. You can just create your own function. And as long as that extraction is then in the config, it's going to know to run that, and the framework will feed it the response, host, and other variables. So this setup for the HTTP integrator really allows most functionality. So we don't have any logic for branching, but in most cases, you're just doing a single path. That Tripwire config that we just ran through in that demo is probably around 15 to 16 request templates. And again, they're just running through, extracting variables from the response, creating a new request, and replacing those variables in that request in order to get cross-site request forgery tokens in there, or IDs that it needs to scrape from the site to hit the next step, and eventually just returning an array of variables that the framework uses to do its activity. So modules are a class of the integrator class, and you can do whatever you want in these modules in addition to subclassing, for instance, the HTTP integrator, which itself is a subclass of the integrator class. By default, basically, you just have some info in there when you knit it in the discovery conf. This is really basic. It's just looking for this. But you can imagine you can have a more advanced regular expression for different versions, for different things. And the discovery engine is going to look at the discovery conf and basically know what ports to look for this product on and know what things to find in the page in order to identify it as that product. Great. So we're going to go now. I mean, obviously, we just talked about kind of how to use these things to pwn an enterprise. But I think an important distinction for everyone to keep in mind when they walk away from this, we're not saying like Tripwire is vulnerable. We're not saying these tools are vulnerable. It's just you have to be careful on how you deploy them. You have to be careful what your assumptions are when you're deploying your security model, right? A lot of people now are realizing, yeah, Active Directory, okay, I need to keep that more isolated, have separate domains for critical zones. But you have to understand that the security products that are managing your most critical hosts need to be treated basically the same way as those most critical hosts, because once you get into those security products, you get access to those critical systems as well. So I'm going to pass it off to Steve, who's going to go through some of the high-level hardening steps you can do.
So, like Kevin was saying that, you can take advantage of these tools, but if they're hardened properly, it's going to be a little more difficult. And right now, one of the things that our tool doesn't have the ability to handle is two-factor authentication, but manually you can. It's always going to be a bypass for this kind of thing, but hardening techniques would dictate that you should use multi-factor authentication on any of these tools that can use it. A lot of these now, EDRs and next-gen AVs and stuff like that, have the ability to implement multi-factor authentication inside them. So we always say it's pretty good to use that. It's will stop a lot of people that don't know how to bypass. Probably stop them in their tracks. And we could also trigger users that if you're on a red team that there's someone in your network trying to access, say, one of your sensitive tools. Another thing also is segmentation. I mean, these management interfaces should be in a segmented zone that is difficult to get to, not just out there on the user net where everyone can just immediately access. So you don't want to only, people think of segmentation as like, okay, where's my sensitive data? Where's my PCI zone? Where's so-and-so? All the places where this stuff is managed should also be thought of in that same way. Networks and domain levels as well. Don't share your regular AD users with the password to manage these tools. Like I previously just said, have an isolated network for these things. The environment should be as hardened as the servers are. We would recommend. Have jump boxes, VPNs. Pretty much your normal segmentation techniques that you would implement in any enterprise should also be applied to these. And like I said as well, account segmentation. You want to not use the same creds that you would use for the management interfaces that you would for your Active Directory. How easy it is to compromise Active Directory credentials. But at the same time, a lot of tools or a lot of these environments will have LDAP configured with that. It's kind of, I would say don't use that, but some people would probably say you should use that. So that's just my personal take. And then also harden your products as well. Deploy trusted SSL certs. If you get in the habit of just trusting an untrusted SSL self-signed cert with a particular product, then an admin could just go to it, see that it's untrusted, yeah, whatever, and you could be manually manipulating the admin at that time, getting his creds, and then just doing this whole attack. So, SSL certs, although we kind of sometimes think is little benign or not important, can be important in this situation. Using strong passwords, make sure it's up to date on patches. Someone finds an RCE in your tool, well, it's kind of pointless to do all these things.
Yep, so those are some high-level hardening recommendations, and really the ethos there is to make sure you're protecting these systems as well as you are your endpoints. Now, obviously, a lot of you guys might be already doing that, but part of the reason we made this tool and are really talking about this is we've had a lot of success here where these don't get as much focus as they need to, and there's situations where we can really leverage them and to get into a lot of places and use them somewhat ironically. There's also specific hardening for these tools themselves that we can go through. Now, obviously, we can't go through everything in the world, but the 3 ones we're releasing as modules I wanted to touch upon and show how you guys could harden these and what things you need to worry about with them. So with Tripwire, we obviously showed that rule creation is going to be really huge. You want to make sure you're monitoring that. If someone's changing the policies in Tripwire on how, what commands are being run, both rules and actions, which also can run execution, you need to be aware of that. So these changes really should only be happening during a change window, and if it's happening outside of that, something might be going on and you can be alerted on that. Additionally, we talked about kind of account segmentation and making sure that, someone who has, let's say you have 2 domain forests, someone who has domain admin on one low trust forest can't log into a Tripwire instance that manages systems in a high trust forest, right? Same idea, intra tool. Make sure you limit rule and actions permissions. You don't need your internal audit team to be able to change rules or run commands to the system on arbitrary hosts, right? So be careful when you give people access to these systems to not give them the keys to the kingdom. Splunk is one of the first ones that we actually leveraged. The good thing about it, since it's a monitoring tool, it's really good at monitoring, keeps great audit logs. You really want to be looking at the deployment server in this case. Splunk has a deployment server that can basically be used to send configurations down to other Splunk systems, which can include the forwarders that you're installing on all your endpoints. Now, those configurations can basically be like, hey, run this script every 5 minutes. So this is another tool that you can use in order to pwn endpoints. So you want to watch for that deployment server modification. You want to watch for new app installation, because if an app gets installed on your Splunk server, that basically can be running whatever code's in the app under the privileges of the Splunk server, and obviously has permissions then to change the deployment server configuration to then pwn your endpoints. So you want to make sure you're watching those, and again, Splunk is great with this because it has great audit logs. One thing, don't make it ever use your admin. Again, I know as a contractor, I've probably had admins to tons of Splunk instances, and using something like SECSMASH, I could have basically had access to most critical endpoints in all those environments. You probably want to limit who you're giving admin and closely monitor it. And when you can, just onboard users in Splunk as regular users. You want them running searches, not editing deployment server configurations. You also want to make sure you run forwarders as a low-level account. A lot of times, if you just run the installation, it will install it under the system user, which obviously is not good if an attacker is leveraging deployment server to run exploits against those endpoints. If it's a low-level user that only has access to, say, the log files it needs to, and not the whole system, It's obviously still not good because someone's getting code execution under a certain user context, but it's a lot better than getting code execution in the system. One more thing for Splunk, you also don't have to use the deployment server. That's not a core component of the Splunk platform. If you don't use that, there's really no way to leverage that in this case. There's a lot of existing processes and tools, right? Ansible, Puppet, things like that to manage deployments and manage configurations. You're probably better off using an existing hardened process. And again, make sure that process is hardened as well and can't be leveraged. Carbon Black is another one of the tools we're going to be integrating in this. And basically, the way it works with Carbon Black is you can start a session with any endpoint in Carbon Black and basically run, again, arbitrary commands as system that themselves don't really get logged in the standard Carbon Black areas. So if I'm running PowerShell.exe and spawning a shell, if I just did that in the command prompt of the system, Carbon Black would freak out. If I'm doing it through Carbon Black, there's a lot less alerts. Now, you can still see that through monitoring, so you want to make sure you test that, run those commands, and make sure you get some insight to how those are happening, and you have some eye on that to see if an attacker's in there. Also, the way this tool works is it opens sessions to those users. And so if you're seeing a ton of closed sessions to the endpoints, that's probably not normal activity. Look at the commands that are being run on those sessions. It's being kept as a log, and see what was happening. You want to keep an eye on that. You also can disable the go live server if not needed to avoid that functionality. So that was kind of high level of the tool. Again, just to leverage basically existing, really, C2 infrastructure and environments during your red teams. And also to give back to the community and use your expertise in these tools to basically contribute to this modular framework. So the next step is we're going to release this next week after summer camp is over. The alpha release, the module API may be somewhat subject to revision. So we might switch things around with the requests and stuff like that if we find certain things where it's really not working well. So just keep in mind, if you are going to work on a module here, we may have to change some things. But we should have that hardened up pretty quickly here. We're launching with multiple modules to start with. So Tripwire, Splunk, Carbon Black Response, and Google Rapid Response. Those are going to be the 4 we start with. We're familiar with them, so we can put them in there. But it should be relatively straightforward to add more modules. And again, we're really looking for, hopefully, community involvement here. So these modules, the amount of time it takes to implement them greatly varies. It can take hours to days. Carbon Black, I think it took us like 2 or 3 hours. Tripwire took like a week because it was just so crazy, like how the requests go back and forth. The real effort is getting access to these solutions for analysis, right? So a lot of times, the first time we encounter some of these things are on pen tests. And of course, we can manually leverage them and use them, but it's hard to build a repeatable module around it without access to that tool. So if you have that tool in your environment or you have that tool in a lab, it'd be great to get your expertise on there and help out the community. Now, yeah, the one thing is we were trying to get Tanium because that one's just crazy and all the things it can execute on endpoints, but they're really don't want NFRs. So.
Yeah, also as Kevin alluded to, so we have kind of 4 main ones that we're launching initially, but there's other ones that we're kind of eyeing as well that we're in the works of building out. So those should probably be coming shortly after we have our initial release. But yeah, you'll see those when they come out. So any questions? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you guys have the capability, perhaps like through a layer 2 attack, I get a cookie for administrative workstation. And do you have the capability to replay a cookie to authenticate to that and keep that session alive and still keep kind of similar kind of things? And my second question to you, I'm sorry to be a hog, have you guys considered or are interested in the use of abusing business continuity and backup and disaster recovery products in such a way where you can run a command and run a backup and still kind of get the same kind of thing? I've used those as well. So I'm just curious if you guys are interested in that.
So those are great questions and good comment as well. So for the first point, the modules are pretty arbitrary. If you want, you could basically set a variable to be the cookie variable, and you could build a module around, this cookie interception. And for the password, you just set that cookie. Now, we don't have anything in the tool itself that make it easily right now to basically have the tool mine that cookie itself. But if you were able to get that cookie and you had a module designed around using the cookie instead of the password, it should be pretty straightforward. Now, I think what a good idea, like you mentioned, it might be easy to just say, have the same module have an option for both. I think that would be really cool to make it more flexible. At this point, it doesn't, but that's part of the reason why the module API is still, we're saying it might change, because there's a lot of things that we're still looking into and finding as we go along. And for the second part, that's absolutely right. I mean, we started with security products because we're in the security industry. We've installed these products. We're familiar with them. But there's a lot of things out there that you could leverage for similar ends. Backup and recovery sounds like a great one. I don't have personal experience with that, but I could imagine it sounds like you've used that on engagements, and that could be a good one to even put in here. Other tools like Jenkins or DevOps tools are also, prime. I know people probably leverage Jenkins a lot on pen testing because it hooks into so many things. Anywhere there's an opportunity to basically do that command and control traffic, it doesn't have to be a specific security product, is something that could be a good potential for this or for just a strategy in general on your pen test.
Also, kind of going back to Kevin's first point, is a lot of times during engagements, we don't, if they don't have their domain creds being used to manage these tools, what a lot of times we like to do is just get their browser profile, download that, and take the information out of that. Usually we'll bypass 2FA with that, get the cookies out of that, and can use them. Our tool right now can use APIs and I believe session cookies, if I remember correctly. So if you didn't really see, I'm not sure, you probably didn't really see on the demo, but you can, if you don't set a username, it's going to default to thinking that's either an API or session cookie. So you can use that. Like I said, if you say on network analysis or extracting someone's browser profile, then you can get that information.
But again, that wouldn't work out of the box because the module was designed to place that password field in a specific area. So yeah, if you had a module that basically put that password field in a cookie field, then yeah, you put the cookie in there. But I think it'd be easy to add basically an auth token field that then goes to that if it sees that. So, yep.
Thanks. So both Splunk and Tripwire have some dangerous configuration settings that I think are normally on by default, often to make it easy to install new nodes and whatnot, or to manage and do remediation instead of just monitoring. So if you're willing to give up some of that capability, you can tighten it down. Any thoughts about that, or about having your tool maybe suggest more secure configuration settings?
Yeah, I think security by default is really important. We've seen this from no end with Microsoft products on people exploiting that forever, but it's not only Microsoft and Windows. These tools, like you said, can have similar insecure by default configurations. Now, part of what we think is we obviously don't want to reduce the functionality because part of what makes these tools so good and so useful for us is that power, right? I think what's important here, and what I hope you guys come away from, is not that the tools are bad or that there's problems with them, but that you need to make sure they're really protected because they are basically one of your highest crown jewels. So I would say actually, keep that functionally on there. Obviously, if you don't need it, turn it off. But protect the tool itself and monitor it so you know if it's compromised, and make it very difficult to compromise. And that way you can still leverage it to its fullest while avoiding mitigating the chance or risk of something happening as much as you can.
I guess I'd like to have a maximum capability profile and a maximum safety profile. Did anybody not hear me? I guess I'd like to have a maximum safety profile and a maximum capability profile, and maybe something reasonable in the middle. So, 2 or 3 profiles of configuration settings that you could switch between.
That would make things a lot more easier than the current 500 options you have to figure out. So.
So I think I've had some experience with this as well, and I think the big thing is that vendors aren't putting out host minimums as far as permissions. We're not following that. If we followed that, that's going to limit the impact of these things massively. And you go on the vendor sites and you can't find that. Their recommendation is root. Great.
Yeah.
Right?
Everything works.
I hope this helps build pressure on the vendors to do that, to release those kinds of guides.
Yeah, absolutely. Like kind of Kevin was alluding to, is that we build this to kind of get the word out there. Make sure the vendors are not just kind of doing things mildly. They're securing things well. Giving best practice guides for the people that they're selling these tools to. So yeah, definitely. Any other questions?
Great.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys.
Good. Thanks for having us.